So let's talk about this amazing book. And before we start with the connection between Zionism and Nazism, can you talk about how Zionism was, as you referred to earlier, a Christian idea? A lot of people, I think, confuse the religious call to go back to Israel with political Zionism. And as you point out, political Zionism started, it was a Christian thing. A lot of people also know about Christian Zionism, but they think it's a recent thing with the evangelicals, like Pastor Hagee, for instance. So can you correct that?
Yes, I mean, the Roman Catholic Church believed that it was a successor to the children of Israel. The Jews had forsaken Jesus, and therefore they'd abandoned their covenant with God. So the Catholics represented the true children of Israel. The Protestants, the Reformation, overturned that idea. They believed that the Jews in Europe constituted those who'd been expelled, apparently, and they were the true inheritors, and therefore their mission was to return. So the idea of a return to Palestine was very common in the post-Reformation, Renaissance, and then Enlightenment era. And that was an ideological commitment that stemmed from the fact, if you like, that Protestantism was the kind of religion of capitalism, of colonialism, whereas Catholicism was a religion of feudalism. So you had that ideological, if you like, environment. And then imperialism began to fasten on the idea, starting with Napoleon in 1799, who wanted a Jewish state in Palestine, because they saw it to the advantage of imperialism. And in 1838, Britain appointed its first consul in Jerusalem, called the Protector of the Jews, because that was their rationale for establishing a presence in Palestine, because Palestine was seen as a very important strategic area. Although the Suez Canal had not yet been built, it was still the trade route through to India in many ways. And then the Suez Canal was built, and that made it much, much more important, because for Britain, India was the jewel in the crown of the empire. We extracted great wealth from it. So having a stable settler state adjacent to the Suez Canal was extremely important. But even before the Suez Canal, and of course, there had been all the talk about cutting through the canal. In 1840, as I say, Palmerston approached the Board of Deputies of British Jews to get them to issue a statement in support, but they were very reluctant. They didn't want anything to do with it. It wasn't part of their priority. In 1842, they issued a statement very clearly saying they did want no part of support for Zionism, which was a non-Jewish phenomena. And not only at the Board of Deputies in 1885, the Pittsburgh Declaration of Reform Rabbis in the United States similarly said they wanted, any idea the return to Palestine should be excised from the prayer book. We are simply Jewish members of the American people, if you like. We're not a separate nation. So it was the non-Jews and it was the anti-Semites, because the evangelicals were also the flip coin of anti-Semitism. The anti-Semites also loved Zionism because it got rid of the Jews in their midst. And so you had this kind of devil's alliance, if you like, between Zionism and anti-Semitism, which has persisted up to this very day. I mean, people like Trump, they're anti-Semitic, but extremely pro-Zionist. Hagee said that, that Hitler was God's instrument in driving the Jews to Palestine. In a sermon he's tried to excise from the internet. But
who said that? Sorry, I didn't catch the name. Who?
John
Hagee, yeah.
Hagee. He said that Hitler was the instrument of God. He was doing God's work in driving the Jews, these wretches who didn't want to go, to Palestine. And that's part of that kind of theological discourse, in a sense. and Hagee as part of it. So, I mean, that's really what the situation is and was, that the anti-Semites loved Zionism because it accepted that Jews did not belong where they lived. Uh, and, I mean, Herzl is on record as saying that the anti-Semites will be our most dependable friends, and that the anti-Semitic countries are allies. And that's in his diaries. And there's much else besides. I mean, he said anti-Semitism is the driving force of Zionism. Uh, it is the steam engine, if you like. So, I mean, that was the basis of all the collaboration that followed. That the anti-Semites said get out, and the Zionists said we're only too willing to do so.
Right. Can you talk also about how recent a phenomenon Jewish Zionism is? Because a lot of people assume that Jews always wanted to return. And you, of course, have argued very convincingly, and it's based on evidence, that that's just not the case.
No, it's not. I mean, when political Zionism,
And I should put return in quotes, by the way, return, yeah.
well, yes, of course, because we were never there. European Jews, there's no reason to believe that European Jews ever descended from the Middle East in the first place. I mean, there are various theories about where they and how they originated, but it's a racial myth. But Jews, when Zionism came on the scene, the Orthodox were vehemently opposed to it because it was contrary to everything they believed, and it was forcing the hand of God. So they opposed it on that basis. And Agudat Yisrael, which is now in the Israeli Knesset, was formed in order to oppose Zionism. The old Yeshuv, as Chaim Weizmann called them, in Palestine, because in the middle of the 19th century, Jerusalem was already a majority Jewish city. But it consisted of the Orthodox who went to Palestine in order to study and to pray. They were subsidized by richer Jews in the diaspora, but they had no political ambitions. They lived as part of the kind of matrix, if you like, of religious minorities in Palestine, in Jerusalem in particular. There was no conflict. There was no intention to form a Jewish state or a Jewish supremacy. I mean, it was unheard of. And so when the Zionists came, they were most unwelcome because they were upsetting everything they had established. Theirs was a religious motivation. But of course, the Zionists uh, had a political ambition which superseded that and was simply used religion to cloak its own ambitions. But Jews never really wanted to go to Palestine. I mean, it's in their prayers about returning, but all that meant, as Bernard Lazar said, was next year I want to be free. Nothing more. When 2.5 million Jews emigrated from Russia as refugees, 99% of them went to Britain, France, and most of all, the United States.
Right.
Barely 1% went to Palestine. There was nothing to
And
stop
they
them.
could have.
Yeah, there was no immigration barriers. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, you didn't need a
Right.
visa in those days. You didn't need a passport. You could go, but and actually, a majority who went came back because the land wouldn't support them. So Zionism was always subsidized from its beginnings. That was the only way it could get off.